Imagine for a moment that the entire global economy is a massive, interconnected house of cards, each card representing a debt obligation, a mortgage-backed security, or a sovereign bond, all stacked precariously on a table that is constantly shaking. Now imagine that the table is held up by a single leg, the unwavering faith that the United States government will always honor its debt, that the U.S. Treasury bond is the ultimate safe haven, the bedrock upon which the entire financial world is built. That leg is now rotting, cracking under the weight of $34 trillion in national debt, a figure so astronomically large that it has ceased to have any real meaning in the human mind, existing only as a cold, impersonal number on a computer screen. But here is the terrifying reality that the financial press refuses to articulate. The U.S. government is not just borrowing money to fund wars or social programs. It is borrowing money to pay the interest on its previous borrowing, a Ponzi scheme of epic proportions that requires a constant stream of new buyers for its debt to prevent a catastrophic default. As of 2026, the interest payments on the national debt have surpassed the entire defense budget, consuming nearly $1 trillion a year that could have been spent on infrastructure, education, or healthcare. And this number is set to double within the next decade as the older low-interest bonds mature and are replaced by higher-yielding ones. The question that keeps every central banker and finance minister awake at night is not whether the debt will eventually become unsustainable, but when the market will finally lose faith in the U.S. government's ability to repay its obligations, triggering a sovereign debt crisis that would make the 2008 financial collapse look like a minor tremor. To understand how the United States accumulated this staggering mountain of debt, we have to take a painful journey through the last 25 years, a period marked by two catastrophic wars, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, a global pandemic that shut down the entire world economy, and a series of tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest Americans. The War on Terror, launched in the aftermath of 9/11, cost the U.S. Treasury over $8 trillion, a sum that was financed entirely through borrowing rather than taxation, allowing the Bush administration to wage war without having to ask the American public to sacrifice anything more than their young soldiers. Then came the 2008 financial crisis, triggered by the collapse of the housing bubble, which required a massive government bailout of the too-big-to-fail banks, a transfer of wealth from the taxpayer to the financial sector that cost over $700 billion in direct outlays and trillions more in emergency lending. The Obama administration, rather than prosecuting the bankers who had caused the crisis, chose to preserve the integrity of the financial system by inflating the money supply and propping up the banks, a decision that sowed the seeds for the even greater crisis we are now facing. And then came COVID-19, which prompted a response of unprecedented magnitude, with the federal government pumping over $6 trillion into the economy through stimulus checks, expanded unemployment benefits, and loans to businesses, all of which were financed by the Federal Reserve's money printing machine, creating a tsunami of new dollars that flooded the global economy and set the stage for the inflationary spiral that is now eating away at the real value of your savings. But the problem is not just the amount of debt, it is the changing nature of the buyers who are willing to hold that debt, because the traditional anchors of the U.S. Treasury market, foreign central banks, pension funds, and insurance companies, are beginning to sell off their holdings, forcing the Federal Reserve to step in as the buyer of last resort. For decades, China and Japan were the largest foreign holders of U.S. debt, purchasing billions of dollars in treasuries to keep their own currencies competitive and to invest their massive trade surpluses. But over the last 5 years, both nations have been systematically reducing their holdings, diversifying into gold and other assets as a hedge against the dollar's inevitable decline, and sending a clear signal that they no longer view U.S. debt as the risk-free asset it once was.
The Federal Reserve, which owns roughly 25% of the entire national debt, is now trapped in an impossible position. If it stops buying bonds, the market will crater and interest rates will skyrocket, making it impossible for the government to service its debt. But if it continues to buy bonds, it will be effectively monetizing the debt, printing money to pay the government's bills, which will further devalue the dollar and accelerate inflation. This is the classic dilemma of the debt trap, a scenario that has played out in countless emerging market economies, Greece, Argentina, Venezuela, but is now happening to the world's largest and most powerful nation, with consequences that will be felt in every corner of the globe. Let's shift our focus to the corporate sector, because the sovereign debt crisis is mirrored and in many ways exacerbated by the explosion of corporate debt that has taken place over the last decade, fueled by the Federal Reserve's zero interest rate policy that made borrowing virtually free for large corporations. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon have issued hundreds of billions of dollars in bonds, not because they needed the money for productive investment, but because they could borrow at rock-bottom rates and use the proceeds to buy back their own stock, artificially inflating their share prices and enriching their executives and shareholders. This is the corporate share buyback boom, a phenomenon that has transferred trillions of dollars from the balance sheets of companies to the pockets of the wealthy, while leaving the companies themselves dangerously over-leveraged and exposed to rising interest rates. Now that the era of cheap money is coming to an end, with the Federal Reserve raising rates to combat inflation, the corporate bond market is facing a wave of downgrades and defaults that will trigger a cascade of bankruptcies across the manufacturing, retail, and commercial real estate sectors. The so-called zombie companies, firms that were only kept alive by cheap debt and are now unable to service their obligations, will be the first to fall, dragging down their suppliers, their employees, and their creditors in a domino effect that will send shockwaves through the entire economy. The narrative of the resilient, innovative American corporation is a fairy tale. The reality is a house of leverage that is about to collapse under its own weight.
Now, let's zoom in on the commercial real estate sector, which is the ticking time bomb that poses the most immediate threat to the global banking system. Because the loans that funded the construction of office towers, shopping malls, and hotels are coming due in a market that has been permanently altered by the shift to remote work. In major cities like New York, San Francisco, and London, office vacancy rates have soared past 20%, reaching levels not seen since the Great Depression, and property values have plummeted by 30 to 50% from their pre-pandemic peaks. The banks that hold these loans are now sitting on a mountain of unrealized losses because the collateral they hold is worth far less than the principal they lent, and the borrowers are increasingly unable to refinance their debt at current interest rates. When a major commercial mortgage-backed security defaults, it will trigger a chain reaction of margin calls, fire sales, and bank failures that will dwarf the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008. And the banks are far less capitalized than they were in the aftermath of the last crash. The Federal Reserve has been quietly conducting stress tests and providing emergency liquidity to the largest banks, but these measures are merely buying time, postponing the inevitable reckoning that will come when the market finally realizes that the commercial real estate market is a black hole that will swallow hundreds of billions of dollars in capital. The average American has no idea that their pension fund, their retirement account, and their savings are all tied up in these toxic assets, and when the bubble finally bursts, they will be the ones left holding the bag. But what about the emerging markets, you might ask? Because the sovereign debt crisis is not a uniquely American phenomenon. It is a global pandemic that has infected every continent, from the capital cities of Europe to the burgeoning economies of Asia and Latin America. Sri Lanka has already defaulted on its debt, triggering a humanitarian crisis that has left millions without access to food, medicine, or fuel, a stark preview of what awaits other vulnerable nations. Zambia, Ghana, and Ethiopia are teetering on the brink, unable to service their dollar-denominated debts because the strong dollar has made their repayments significantly more expensive,
while the collapse of commodity prices has devastated their export revenues. The International Monetary Fund has stepped in with emergency loans, but these loans come with harsh austerity conditions that force these nations to cut spending on healthcare, education, and infrastructure, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and dependency that benefits the creditor nations at the expense of the debtor nations. The West has imposed sanctions on Russia and isolated China, but these actions have backfired spectacularly, pushing Russia and China to form their own alternative financial systems, complete with their own payment networks, reserve currencies, and gold-backed assets. The era of the unipolar world, where the US dollar reigned supreme and the global financial system was a unified, cohesive whole, is coming to an end, and the fragmentation that is taking its place will lead to a series of localized sovereign defaults that will eventually snowball into a global debt crisis of unprecedented scale.
And let's not forget the most vulnerable segment of the global population, the individual consumers, the working families, who are the ultimate victims of this fiscal irresponsibility. Because every dollar of government debt is a future tax on their labor, a claim on their future earnings that will be collected through higher taxes, lower public services, or the silent tax of inflation. The average American household now carries over $100,000 in debt, encompassing credit cards, student loans, auto loans, and mortgages, a burden that has become increasingly unsustainable as interest rates have risen and wages have stagnated. The student loan crisis alone is a $1.7 trillion catastrophe, a debt that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, and that has condemned an entire generation to a lifetime of indentured servitude to the financial system. The for-profit colleges and the predatory lenders who created this crisis have faced virtually no consequences, pocketing billions of dollars in profits while their victims struggle to afford basic necessities. And now the federal government is considering a forgiveness program that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, but the money for that forgiveness will have to come from somewhere, likely through higher taxes or further borrowing, which will ultimately be paid by the same people who were promised relief. The debt cycle is a closed loop, a trap that ensures that the working class will always be in debt to the creditor class, a form of economic serfdom that is just as oppressive as the feudal systems of the Middle Ages. But here is where the narrative takes a dark turn into the realm of the truly conspiratorial, because the architects of the debt crisis are not just the bankers and politicians, they are the ideologues who have spent decades pushing the doctrine of modern monetary theory, a dangerous economic philosophy that argues that a country that borrows in its own currency can never go bankrupt because it can always print more money to pay its bills. This theory, which has been embraced by progressive politicians and central bankers alike, is a prescription for disaster, justification for unlimited government spending that ignores the fundamental reality that printing money devalues the currency and destroys the purchasing power of the citizens. The proponents of MMT are essentially advocating for a form of financial alchemy, the belief that the government can create wealth out of thin air without any negative consequences, a fantasy that has been proven wrong by every historical example of hyperinflation, from Weimar Germany to Zimbabwe to Venezuela. The US is currently walking the same path as these failed states, and the only question is how far down that path we have already traveled before the inevitable collapse. The politicians who are pushing for trillions of dollars in new spending on social programs, infrastructure, and climate change are operating under the assumption that the money will never have to be repaid. But the bond market is a harsh, unforgiving master, and it will eventually demand its pound of flesh. Let's step back and look at the broader geopolitical implications of this debt crisis. Because the United States is not just risking its own economic stability, it is risking the stability of the entire Western alliance and the global order that has been in place since the end of World War II. The dollar's status as the global reserve currency
is what gives the U.S. its extraordinary power, the ability to impose sanctions, to finance its military, and to borrow at virtually zero cost. And if that status is eroded by the debt crisis, the U.S. will lose its ability to project power and influence around the world. China is watching this process with glee, positioning itself as the responsible, prudent alternative to the profligate West, and offering its own currency as a stable store of value for the developing world. The BRICS nations are actively working on a gold-backed reserve currency that would directly challenge the dollar's supremacy, and if they succeed, the U.S. will be stripped of its ability to print money to finance its deficits, forcing it to undergo a brutal adjustment that will send unemployment soaring to 20% or more. The world is entering a new Cold War, not of military confrontation, but of financial domination. And the side that wins will be the side that can maintain its fiscal discipline and keep the faith of the global markets. The U.S. is losing that battle, and the consequences will be felt by every American citizen, from the coal miner in West Virginia to the tech worker in Silicon Valley. And so we arrive at the precipice, the edge of the cliff, where the only thing standing between us and a complete financial collapse is the belief that the United States government will always do the right thing, that it will ultimately make the hard choices necessary to restore fiscal sanity. But the history of the last 50 years suggests the opposite. Every crisis has been met with more borrowing, more money printing, and more deference to the financial sector, a pattern of behavior that has led us to this moment of maximum danger. The solution to the debt crisis is painfully obvious. We must raise taxes on the wealthy, close the loopholes that allow corporations to avoid paying their fair share, cut wasteful military spending, and implement a real, honest-to-God austerity program that matches our spending with our revenue. But these measures are politically impossible because the people who would be asked to sacrifice are the very people who control the political system, and they will never vote to tax themselves. The inevitable outcome is a restructuring of the debt, a default disguised as a soft restructuring, where bondholders are forced to accept a significant haircut on their holdings, and the value of the dollar is systematically devalued to wipe out the real burden of the debt. This is the great unspoken secret of the global financial system. The debt will never be repaid in real terms. It will be inflated away, transferred from the creditors to the debtors, from the savers to the spenders, from the prudent to the reckless. The question is not whether this will happen, but whether you are prepared for the moment when it does, when your savings are cut in half, when your pension is reduced to a pittance, and when the entire economic order you have known your entire life is swept away in a wave of financial destruction. The mystery is not the debt itself. The mystery is why we continue to pretend that it is sustainable, why we continue to play along with a game that we have already lost, and what it will take for us to finally wake up and demand a different future.